Hello everyone. So this short tutorial is again the continuation of using database PHP MyAdmin, but in this one we'll start with programming in PHP. Okay. So I've created like these three files, login one and connect. So those are the right ones. So these files are with extension .php. And I have saved these files in my htdoc folder, which is in the XAMPP server. So we need XAMPP web server in order to program in PHP and run our code on the server. Okay, and I'm saving these files in the htdocs folder. So let's look what's there and in order to access these files on the browser, I have to use localhost command, localhost, then my directory name lab1, and then my PHP file that I have created. So in this particular file, all I'm having is a form attribute, a form element of HTML, and simply having a username and a password. So these are input type as text. Now, if I click on the view page source, I should be able to look at the code here. So basically I'm creating a form, right, with two fields, username and password. Those are text. And I'm validating those with the use of JavaScript. So by validation meaning that the text boxes here shouldn't be empty. So I'm grabbing the values by their ID names, okay, in the variable X and variable Y. So I'm grabbing the username and password values by the function called getElementById in JavaScript. That's the function. And I'm taking those values and assigning it to the variable X. And then I'm using an if condition to check whether this X is null. And if it is null, I am printing on the screen, I'm alerting the user that your username cannot be null. You have to fill it out. Same, I'm doing it for my password. So let's look here. If I try to right now username and password is empty. And if I click on the login, it is giving me an alert that your username must be filled out. This is coming from the JavaScript. Okay, so the condition is done in the script tag. Now let's say if I enter username, but I skip the password and I click on the login. So again, it is giving me an alert that even your password must be filled out. Okay, so this is coming here again from this script that I have written here. I've created a function called validate form, and I'm grabbing my element username by ID and then get element by ID password, and then I'm using an if conditions here. Now if I pass both values 1, 2, 3, 4, there can be multiple kinds of validations here. So this is just the basic one, null, not null. There can be other conditioning that can be used here. For example, it should not be a number for a username, or there can be a max length, okay, the amount of characters that a user can type in the password field and in the username field. So there can be many levels of validation. What I'm doing is a very basic one, that it should not be empty. And when I click on the login, it says me welcome, and then it grabs the username and prints it on the screen using PHP code. Now another file that I have here is, if I go back in my directory, I'm on the local host, right, in lab1 directory for PHP, and I'm having another file here called connect.php. Now what it does is, it is connecting to my database that we created in the last lecture using PHP. Okay, now if you go on your PHP MyAdmin here, the database that we created was MyDB. Okay, and if you go into the privileges, you can find out that the username here is root. Okay, and access is granted to root. meaning my username to connect to the database, my username is root and my password is not eligible. So I'll simply leave the password field empty, and my server is localhost. Okay, so for connecting, for writing the script, the PHP script on the PHP script, I'm simply here. So for some reason, I'm not able to show my PHP code, but it is exactly the copy of this code here. So I'm basically giving the server name here is localhost. Username is root, the way I showed you here. So the username, we know you should be able to go into your own databases and then click on the privileges tab, and you should be able to see your username. So I think by default it is root. For password, we will leave it empty. Okay, so password is nothing, so we just leave it empty here. So, and my DB name, my database name is again DB. Okay, so you can see your database name here on the left hand side. That's my database name. Then all I'm doing here is I'm saying connect. So to connect to the database, you use MySql query, where you pass the server name, username, password, and DB. Okay, so if the connection is established, then we are writing an SQL query that we are saying select cust ID. Okay, so let's look. I'm using my, you can change this. Okay, this is coming from, we don't really have to do this. We are going to use our own values from our own database. So here we have customer table and we have cust ID and name. So I'm simply saying select cust ID and cust name from the table column. Okay, so here it should be, here it should be select cust ID and cust name from customer. That's my table name. Okay, similarly, the result is grabbed into the variable called result. And once I have the result, I have to check that the number of rows are greater than 0. So there's an if condition here. If the result is greater than 0, then we are simply printing the result on the screen, right? So for printing, we are using echo. So echo on the screen, your row cust ID. So this should be cust ID, cust name, and then we are going to skip the third field because we are only taking the two fields. So cust ID and cust name. And then connection will be closed. So basically, to connect to your database table, you have to first have a connection. So SQLi command with your server name, username, password, and DB. Username is root, password is empty, and your DB name is the database that you created in your PHP MyAdmin. Once the connection is established, you write the SQL query. So simply we are using select statement and we are grabbing ID and first name from our table, a cust name from our table customer. Once you have that result, you have to count the number of rows. If the number of rows are greater than 0, right, you echo the result on the screen. So we can use this code, and I have already used this code for my connect.php here, and I'll show you what connect.php is giving me. So connect.php, after creating this code and running it, it is giving me three values here, name, and okay, the ordering is wrong. It should be 1, 2, 3, but we can figure that out. But now let's see if our database is also having these three values. Okay, so John, Rachel, and Rashmi, those are three values coming from my customer table. So if I look here, so these are the three values, John, Rashmi, and Rachel. Okay, 1, 2, 3, those are the cust IDs. So very short tutorial, just the beginning of how you can use connect statement to connect to your database and then retrieve the data from the database. One more thing, your XAMPP server should be on. So from your XAMPP control panel, your MySQL and Apache modules should be working. So you have to make them, you have to start them before you start writing the code, and then using the local host in order to access all your files on the server. Okay, so it's a very short tutorial, just the beginning of how can we connect to database. Thank you.